Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the nuts and bolts of operating a nonprofit, presented by SCORE. To start out with, I want to welcome back the people that logged in last week for this same seminar, and I want to apologize for not showing up because of an unforeseen circumstance that I couldn't resolve before the start of the seminar. So I really apologize. And if you're returning, I really appreciate your returning. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, so today's seminar is about the nuts and bolts of operating a nonprofit. I did a part one to this seminar earlier, which was talked about how you actually create a nonprofit, where we walked through all the steps for legally setting up your nonprofit. This one's going to just talk about actually issues that you're going to encounter as you start to operate your nonprofit. First of all, my name is Annette Russ, and I'm actually a retired CPA from Chico, California, and I've been with SCORE as a mentor since 2020. When I was a CPA, owned and operated my own accounting firm, and I did a lot of mentoring of small businesses there. I also did a lot of accounting for a wide variety of businesses, and of course, I did a lot of tax preparation. Hang on a second, somebody has a chat. Oh, good morning. Thank you. Good morning. So I want to, that reminds me, I want to say before we get started that I'm going to go through the presentation, which will probably take about an hour and 30 minutes. And if you will, I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions as we go through the presentation, but if you will go ahead and write the questions in the chat or the question part on the program, then I can address all those questions at the end of the presentation. So back to this. So anyway, I was talking about being a retired CPA. So, and the other thing that I did was when I retired from being a CPA in 2008, I went to Kenya where I had some colleagues, and we actually founded a nonprofit that educated girls in rural Kenya through high school and college. And we also provided them with seminars that helped give them the life skills they needed to negotiate their education and to take and use that education to better their lives, the lives of their families and communities. So nonprofits are born out of a dream and a passion for helping people. And if you're attending this seminar, I know that that defines you as well. So, initially you have this kind of nebulous kind of a dream of what you would like to accomplish. And the question is, how am I going to best accomplish that? How can I use my time in order to accomplish this and to be an effective nonprofit? So there's a couple of things before you start a nonprofit that I really encourage you to think about. The first thing you need to do is to actually sit down and define the need for your nonprofit's services. So in the case of my nonprofit, I first sat down and said, are there girls in rural Kenya who are not going to school, who are living in very low income situations, and without the help of an outside source, be able to attend school and make a better life for themselves? So that's how I defined the need for my nonprofit services. I looked at generally what I wanted to offer, and then I started to look at who is going to need those services. I need to really think about where am I going to operate? because as we'll see in a few minutes as we go through the presentation, there are times that there is an abundance of nonprofits working in one area, which makes it tough for your nonprofit, your brand new nonprofit, to come in and start to also provide services to your beneficiaries that perhaps are already been provided to those people in that area. So you really need to think about where I will operate. And sometimes this means changing your mind, because if you do some research, and you might find there are just an overwhelming number of people providing your services or services similar to that. So once you decide where to operate, then you want to look at what is the pool of potential beneficiaries in that location. So just like to back up just a second and kind of talk a little bit more about what a nonprofit is. Basically, if you were in my previous seminar, we talked about the fact that a nonprofit is a business. It just doesn't pay taxes on the profit or the excess revenue that you have generated as a nonprofit, but you're still a business. And what you're doing is, rather than selling a product, you're selling a service. So just like in any business that you would decide to start, you want to look at who your customers are going to be. And in this case, it's going to be potential beneficiaries. So if you need to decide if your location provides you with that target market or potential beneficiaries. And then, as I alluded to a little bit earlier here, you want to look and see if other nonprofits are already providing services in that location, and kind of doing a little bit of research about that particular nonprofit to get a feel for how much fundraising that they do, how many beneficiaries are they providing to, and looking at some of those things that basically is doing competitive analysis as if you were in a business. So even before you start the paperwork for operating your nonprofit, really decide and think about these kind of issues. Of course, the hardest part is figuring out, where do I start in order to do this kind of research? And I want to share with you some resources right now that are excellent for doing that kind of research. One of the other things I'd like to add that I should have mentioned in the beginning is, first of all, this webinar is being recorded, and that will be made available to you after the seminar. And you can also get a copy of the slide deck for this seminar, so that you don't have to take a lot of notes. All the notes are in the presentation. So the first place that you may want to look is called the Charity Navigator. And this is one of the major charity research sites on the internet. And what it does is it gives you a lot of information about what nonprofits who are currently in operation are doing. And so they highlight a few right here. So of course, there's a lot of work going into the earthquake in Turkey and Syria and Ukraine and the California floods. So those are all the things in the news right now. But you're able to go up here and just click on Discover Charities and look at what kind of charities are operating at this point, either in sometimes it will give you a category. So this one is empowering girls and women, or for addressing global poverty. And so you can search in one of these categories, depending on what the goal of your nonprofit is. You can also look to find out what are the most followed charities. So let's click on that. So in this case here, what is interesting is that they have listed many of the popular ones, and you've heard a lot of these, and they show you about the rating of these nonprofits, which is a real help for people who are wanting to be donors. So the blue ones mean that's excellent. The green ones means that it's 3-star basically. The other thing that's really interesting about this website is that it shows you where these organizations are. Now, in this case, it doesn't show you where they're organized, where they're operating. It tells you where their headquarters are. But down here, if you look at St. Jude Children's Research, it's operating in Memphis. If you look at Disabled Vets, that's in Kentucky, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a great place. And of course, those are all really big nonprofits. Let's look at a couple other things. Here are the most frequently viewed charities, which have like Stephen Siller Tunnel Towers Foundation in Staten Island, which is an interesting one. There's the Wounded Warrior Project, World Kitchen Incorporated. And so this is really, really informational. That'll help you kind of decide, is this, where does my charity fit within this view? So, whoops, sorry, I shut the wrong thing. I shut the wrong thing. Okay, so that's Charity Navigator. Here's another resource that you can use. It's called GuideStar. And it is similar to Charity Navigator, but it also has a very big database of the kind of nonprofits that are out there. And one of the things about GuideStar is that they actually have some kinds of a great blog that has to do with operating your nonprofit. And you know what, I find blogs really helpful too, because lots of times they offer answers to really basic questions. GuideStar is basically a members only type of a site. So you actually do need to join GuideStar in order to use it. But in my mind, it's one of the best websites to join as far as being able to increase my visibility as a nonprofit and to access the other resources that they use as well. Okay, and then this is the one I want to show you that is actually specific to a certain area. And this is called Cause IQ, and you can look at directories of nonprofits by state. And what I did for this webinar, actually just out of the blues, I chose New Orleans. And what just actually amazed me was how many nonprofit organizations are operating in New Orleans. There are 7,406 organizations operating in New Orleans metro area. It says how many people are working in the nonprofit and how much revenue that they raise each year. It gives you the information about the number of organizations that have 0 employees, which means it's just like a one-person nonprofit, all the way up to how many have 1,000 employees, which is 14, which is really interesting. It shows the sizes by the amount of fundraising they do right here. So of course, the majority of them have fundraising in less than 250,000.
Annette, I'm sorry to bother. They're not able to see the website that you're talking about. We're still in the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
That's interesting. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I don't want to talk to a blank screen. Okay, let me back up real quick. Okay, so here's the New Orleans area nonprofits. And like I was just saying, you can see that there are over 7,000 working in the New Orleans area. Tells you how many employees there are, most of them with probably a one person operation. The sizes, the amount of fundraising they do, the most of them are less than 250,000. And then it talks about it a little more detail about those revenue stats. And then now we're down to the types of nonprofits in New Orleans. And the majority of these are religious organizations, educational institutions, arts, culture, and humanity. And what happens is let's look at arts, culture, and humanities. I can look on this, and now I can see even further down what kind of arts. So you keep drilling down behind the numbers till you kind of finally figure out what is operating most successfully in this area. Is this an area that my services will fit in? So that is a really, really great thing for looking at. Let's go back to home, a directory of nonprofits, basically. So that you can search and look right here on this web page. You can look at each particular city and just pick them randomly. I think this only does the US though. It doesn't do international. Whereas if you're trying to want to operate a nonprofit internationally, GuideStar or Charity Navigator would be the best one. Okay, so let's go back to to my PowerPoint slides. Okay, so this is a good place to start in order to define the need, right? And the location for where you want to operate, where you want to start your dream. The first thing that you need to do when you start your nonprofit is to come up with a mission statement, because this is really going to define everything else that you do in your nonprofit. So what I really highly recommend to people when they're thinking about starting a nonprofit is to just start a brainstorming session on paper, writing down all your thoughts about what your nonprofit is going to be, who it's going to serve, what your services are going to be, where you would like to operate, and just kind of do a free-for-all brainstorming with all of your kind of nebulous ideas around what your nonprofit is going to look like. And then based on that brainstorming session, you're going to be able to go through that and pick out what you need in order to write a really good mission statement. Of course, and here's kind of the rules of the road as far as writing a mission statement. The first thing is that you really need to be direct. You don't want to have any vagueness. You want to be able to be explicit enough that you would proactively answer any questions people might have when they look at your nonprofit. So being direct is really important. You have to name the problem, why your organization exists, and who you seek to benefit. So I want to go back to the little nonprofit that I have in Kenya. So the problem for me was that girls in rural Kenya were unable to access education due to cultural and financial issues. So our organization existed to provide those opportunities to girls, as well as enhanced life skills that they could use so that they could use their education, and who I seek to benefit. And those are girls in rural Kenya, in high school and colleges. So be really direct. And actually, you might have to say, okay, step one, name the problem and figure out the best way to define what your problem is, right? And it's step 1, 2, and 3. One of the things that you want to incorporate into your mission statement is you want to use really strong action words, basically. You want to say things like, we empower, we rescue, we advocate, because those are the words that people are going to resonate with, who potential donors or grant makers are going to resonate with. They want to see that you are actually taking action in order to provide these services to people. Good idea to use very simple language. Sometimes it is appealing to use jargon or buzzwords. And I find that's kind of true with nonprofits in general, because there are times when a certain category of nonprofit is in the news, and when around those nonprofits that you're going to see different buzzwords, that kind of grab people's attention. But in your mission statement, in order to show that you're serious and that you're sustainable, you want to kind of avoid those buzzwords that can kind of make it look like you're just jumping on the bandwagon with forming a nonprofit that somehow right now is in the news. Okay, be concise. You only want to use 1 or 2 sentences. And that's a tough one. You need to condense it down into 1 or 2 sentences at the most. You want to be inspiring. And again, that kind of goes back to using those strong action words that can help that can encourage people, because they'll be inspired by what your mission is. And the biggest thing is to not over-explain. If you take this outline to create your mission statement and you keep it concise, you won't over-explain. But people sometimes really struggle. They have 4 or 5, almost a paragraph for a mission statement. So work really, really hard on making that concise. Okay, here's a couple of really good examples of mission statements. As you can see, they're really short and they're really direct. So distribute is the strong word, and they donate furniture to families and individuals turning their houses into homes. And turning houses into homes is a pretty inspiring phrase. The next one is, we rescue and protect and find loving homes for neglected and stray pets. And to me, that's great. They have 3 really strong words: rescue, protect, and find. And then by using loving homes, that's the inspirational part of that. So it'll take you a while to actually be able to elucidate exactly in a few words what you do. In a business, this is like an elevator pitch, basically. And people will say, when you say, oh, I have a nonprofit, in New Orleans, they'll say, well, what do you do? And having a really well-defined mission statement like this will really quickly communicate to people exactly what you do and pique their interest. In fact, when I tell people, what my mission is with the nonprofit in Kenya is, and I'm able to tell them really clearly what we do, it piques their interest. And a lot of times they ask for our website address because they want to go and follow up and find out more about what we do. And so a mission statement is really kind of the keystone for your advertising, basically. Okay, so the next thing that you will want to do as you start to operate your nonprofit is to choose the board of directors. And if you've gone through the paperwork and all the documentation of organizing your nonprofit, you know that you have to choose a board of directors and name them in your paperwork. One of the questions I get often is, do you have to have more than one board of directors? And no, you don't. You can actually be the only member of your board of directors if you're starting as a very small nonprofit. And then you're going to wear all the hats, basically, of this job. But I think that having more than getting a couple more people on your board is invaluable in so many ways, because now I'm going to look at all the tasks that each of these members of the board of directors is responsible for. And if you are the only member, of course, you're going to wear all these hats. So they're basically the president, and president's responsibilities is to do all the planning, you know, both short and long term. The planning is important because you're going to be able to communicate your ideas to your volunteers and the other members of the board of directors so that they can help you achieve your mission. Of course, you manage the day-to-day operations, and a lot of that has to do with delegating and overseeing those tasks. And of course, a really big one for the president is doing the fundraising. That's a huge part of what a president does. A lot of times the president is going to really have a fairly sizable presence in the community and be able to do a lot of networking, and that will help with the fundraising efforts. So keeping a high profile, the president's generally biggest job is to keep a high profile, to kind of be the face of the nonprofit that helps with the fundraising. Another set of tasks that the secretary should do, of course, are keeping minutes of the board meetings, which I highly recommend, because what happens is if you have donors who want to know what you do, they are able to look at the board meetings and to see what you've accomplished. And internally, minutes of the board meetings also help you keep track of the tasks that are being worked on and gauges the progress of those tasks, so that it kind of becomes a history. The board minutes kind of becomes a history of your organization. Secretary will correspond with the donors, basically do all of the things like writing the donor thank you notes, or doing emails, fundraising emails. The secretary can do things like social media tasks. And then the big thing that they do as well is creating and maintaining a database for donors. So what I always recommend for all businesses and for all nonprofits is that you develop some sort of a tool that allows you to collect emails, so that you can now put those emails addresses into your database and use those to communicate with people who have expressed an interest in your nonprofit and have the same passion as you do. The treasurer is a big task. Basically, they have to do everything that are financial matters, right? Paying bills and deposits. Treasurer is responsible for preparing an operating budget and a capital asset budget. They have to organize the equipment and other property. They prepare the annual financial reports, and they're going to work with the accountant and CPA to file the required quarterly and annual settings like tax returns or payroll tax returns or filings with the Secretary of State or the Attorney General's office. So treasurer is a really big role in a nonprofit. And I always recommend that, first of all, you pick somebody who has some past experience with these kind of tasks. And secondly, to actually let the person who is treasurer know exactly what they're going to be doing, so that when they volunteer, they have a feeling for the types of tasks and how big a job that they're going to be taking on. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about real quick is that if you're a one-man operation, you're doing all of these three things. So you're making all of the decisions, all the fundraising, thinking about how to spend that money, designing the programs, et cetera, et cetera. If by having a president and a treasurer, what happens is you're doing a division of duties. You're kind of segregating the duties of being the president from being a treasurer. And what that does is to create confidence in your donors that the money that they're providing is being used appropriately. So the money's just not going to the organization, and the president is the single decider about where money goes and how much things, is the only one signing the checks. I need to be really direct about that. So there's a division of duties, and that's really, really reassuring to funders that there's some financial oversight in what's going on with their donations. So at the least, I really recommend, besides the president, a treasurer and then the secretary, who can be really invaluable with all that other really important tasks about dealing with donors. So there might be other people that you're going to have on the board. And what this can start to be is an advisory committee. Besides the president, secretary, and treasury, now I'm going to add additional people to my board, and I could start out with an advisory committee. So these people that I add to the board as advisors are going to be able to help bring a different perspective and different ideas to me outside of the organization. All of us, I think, when we're running a business or we're doing a project, we get somewhat tunnel vision. So quite often, we aren't able to think outside the box. And when you have an advisory committee who is there to give you new ideas and give you feedback about this idea and is it going to work or how it could be done differently, it is really, really helpful. And what's great about an advisory committee is that the members are not tasked with specific actions that they need to do. They're there to give you advice, right? So they don't have to participate in any of the other tasks involved with running a nonprofit. And people really like to give advice. They want to be consulted. They want to, have their input heard. So this is kind of an honorary committee that I've found people really enjoy participating in. They believe in your cause and they want to contribute, but they don't have the time to take on additional tasks over and above just perhaps giving feedback and ideas. One of the great things that you need to do when you think about other members besides the advisory committee, if you're going to get other board members, is that you're going to want to look at the skills, experience, and expertise of the people that you have on your board so that you can identify the gaps that you have in your organization. So for example, if the treasurer, the secretary, and you do not have any experience with social media, then that would be somebody that you might want to draft for your board. Or if you don't have any web making experience, but website making experience, but you know somebody who would be able to do that voluntarily for your operation, then that would be a good board member. A lot of times board members are drafted for their ability to do fundraising. And so being able to invite prominent members of your community or prominent members of your industry to be on your board will really raise the presence of your operation, because you'll have people who are prominent and who are sharing the fact that, oh, I'm working with this organization. They're really great, and they're just a really good hub in your network for fundraising. One of the things when you're looking to add board members is to create some sort of an application that people can fill out to indicate their interest in serving on the board. So what this does is this gives people, volunteers, an opportunity to say, here's what I want to help with. I can help with emails. I can help with collecting donations from of used clothing from people. I can provide transportation. One of the things that I found to be really successful with doing this is actually not only having a board application, but listing all the ways that people can volunteer within your community, within your operation, and they can go down and check the individual tasks that they would be willing to participate in. So basically, rather than saying, oh, we really need a social media person, can you do it? It's great if that you give them an opportunity to choose in the ways that they would like to volunteer. Really important when you have a board directors is to have a new member orientation. Sometimes you're so wrapped up in doing what you're doing, operating the organization, putting out fires here and there, that we kind of forget that we need to have an orientation to give the new members a feel for who's who, what they do, what our passion is, what our priorities are, and then give them an opportunity to see that they're going to have some input as a volunteer into the organization. And of course, setting realistic expectations of what volunteers can do. I have found that people who tend to be volunteers volunteer for more than one organization. Quite often they're volunteering for multiple organizations. So keeping that in mind, being able to set an expectation of what that volunteer can do based on their time constraints and their expertise is really important. And I think actually communicating that with the volunteer right up front, so that down the line there's not any confusion of exactly what their role is in the organization. But the heart of your organization is going to be your board of directors and your volunteers, obviously. And having a really well-rounded board of directors is going to really make your organization run and be effective. Now, as I mentioned a little earlier, the fact is that a nonprofit is actually a business. It just doesn't pay it just doesn't pay taxes on the profit it generates, which is actually the fundraising revenue less the expenses, which is the excess revenue that you've raised, which I would call the nonprofit's profit. So you don't pay taxes on it, but you are a business. But you're not selling a product necessarily, but you're selling an idea. So because you're selling something, you're really a business. And so the bottom line is that you need to write a business plan in order for your nonprofit. A business plan is simply a map of how are you going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And you have to have a map. You can't just jump in and start operating right off the bat. And so here are the sections of a business plan for a nonprofit that are really important. First of all, you need to gather the data supporting the need, doing really good research on the internet so that you're able to find out what is it that people need, where do they need it, and how many people are there. And that needs to be really strongly documented. You need to, before you start operating your nonprofit, you need to define measurable goals and benchmarks, which means how am I going to judge if my nonprofit is successful or not? In a business, that depends on, we have goals like the amount of sales that I'm going to generate this year, the amount of profit, the amount of products that I'm going to sell, the places in which I'm going to sell my products. Those are kind of the for-profit business goals. But a nonprofit also has to have some measurable goals. And they're kind of similar, right? Like how many beneficiaries do I want to reach? How much do I want to do in fundraising? How much, like I want to back up for a second. So like in my operation of educating girls in rural Kenya, my measurable goals were how many girls are we currently educating in high school? How many girls are we currently educating in colleges? And how many girls have taken their education and are in a successful career and have successful career opportunities. So then that first group of girls that I had run through my program, I could say that 90% of those girls completed high school, 80% completed college, and 50% of those girls got jobs related to their education. So now those are my benchmarks that I can actually tweak now in order to decide, can I do better than that? Do I want to have 100% of these girls that I'm educating complete high school? So I start out with my first measurable goals and use those as a benchmark. And now I can take and I can tweak my goals to decide what kind of changes and what that I need to make in operating my nonprofit to achieve the goals, that the mission that I have defined. You need to create a budget. Sometimes when I talk to nonprofit people, what they have done is they said, oh, we're going to start doing fundraising. That's the first thing they know they need to do fundraising. But the question is how much fundraising do we need to do? So instead of creating a fundraising plan first, they need to back up and create a budget. And creating a budget, of course, is very difficult, whether you're in a business or a nonprofit, right? Because you're just starting out, and this budget is really going to be the best guess of what you're going to have around expenses. A budget is not written in stone. You can always go back and tweak it and change things as you go along. In fact, you should, because as you go through that, you're going to find out, you're going to get new information, you're going to hit some hurdles that is totally going to impact your budget. So you create the initial budget using the best information you have and the best guesses that you have. And then as you continue to operate, you're going to go back and refine your budget. Once you've created that budget, now you can decide what your fundraising plan is going to be. And you can do that on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, a yearly basis, breaking down both the budget and the fundraising plan into little bites so that it makes it really doable, that you can accomplish these tasks one at a time. So looking at a whole year for a brand new nonprofit can be really difficult. So I have encouraged people to start out with maybe doing it at least on a monthly basis to begin with, and see how, okay, I'm going to have expenses for each of these months. Now in the fourth month, I need to do some fundraising because I know that I need to pay these expenses, and I need to now purchase certain capital assets in order to operate my nonprofit. So the budget and the fundraising plan are one and the same, basically. One can't be done without the other. And then here's a really important one for not only you as a nonprofit owner, but for everybody in your organization, is to creating a timeline for operations and fundraising. So this is a way to communicate to people your expectations and your goals and your desires. And so again, it's not going to be written in stone, but write it down. What do I want to accomplish in the next 3 months? What do I want to have accomplished by 6 months? And it really helps prioritize tasks. It really helps in so many ways, right? It helps you prioritize tasks. It helps you to onboard volunteers that you may need to have help with, instead of having volunteers all right up front. Maybe you're not going to need volunteers until 6 months down the line when you're going to start doing a particular activity like fundraising. So a timeline is going to communicate everybody which direction you're going, and basically keep you on the path to where you're going. So this can be done in a, like in a chart, time flow chart, or it can be done in a narrative. And one of the things that I've done in my little nonprofit is, based on that timeline, I share that at every board meeting, so that we can kind of have a check-in about what kind of things that we have done and what things we haven't done, and we can talk about the challenges that we faced. So the timeline is really an important tool for operating your nonprofit. Okay, so a business plan like that can really be daunting to most people. So there are several resources here that I'm going to recommend for how to write a business plan. And there are variations of things, like there's online trainings that you can do. There's one called Coursera. There's Udemy. There's one called Learning Candid. And these are, when you go to these, previous. So you can look at these websites. Some of them cost money and some of them are free. There's online resources. A lot of times these are free. DonorBox is a really good online resource that we're going to look at in a few minutes. Constant Contact, you may have heard of Constant Contact. They are basically an email company, but they started out as an email company, and now they have really expanded their services, and they have a lot of services that can really benefit a nonprofit. So Constant Contact, and believe it or not, Shopify, even though has a really good business plan resource, basically, even though Shopify is basically for people who are doing e-commerce, once again, it also is relevant to writing a business plan for a nonprofit. Using a template is a really excellent place instead of trying to create it from scratch. And here's a couple of places that you can find templates. They're GrowthThink, eForms, and template.net. Some of these are free again. Some of them are actually create a business plan. There's actually one more that I didn't add in here, which is called Life Plan. And it's one that you actually can pay for. You have to pay for as you create it online. One of the things that I urge you to do when you're looking at templates is to really search out the one that is not so complicated and so involved that it is overwhelming and is not relevant to your organization. Because what you can do with these templates is you can pick and choose. You don't have to start out with, step one and work all the way through the template. Discern what is applicable to your organization and go from there. And then, of course, there's score.org, which I think if you found out about this or this webinar, is that you can see that there's all kinds of mentors for writing a business plan. We also have live and recorded webinars about writing business plan, and there's blogs which talk about specific sections of business plans, which I find really helpful. So rather than like writing it all at once, I'll pick out one section of the business plan and work on it, and then I'll go to something like the SCORE blog, who will have a short article or blog post about writing that particular part of the business plan. So there's some resources for you to jump into. And once again, I know it seems odd to think about writing a business plan for a nonprofit, but it's a roadmap that you really need to make sure that your nonprofit's successful and effective. The next, The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is about your website. Everybody is really anxious to get a website initially up and running, because of course the website announces your presence to the world and is the best tool for educating people about what it is your organization does. Sometimes creating a website, jumping right to creating a website can be really an error, a mistake, because the website becomes you jump into it, you start creating it, and now it becomes kind of a jumble of ideas that you haven't really thought out a whole bunch. So before jumping into creating a website, that's where your business plan is going to come in, because a lot of what you write in your business plan is going to translate to what you put on your website. So first of all, definitely write your business plan. Start really basic with a website. It does not have to be real complicated in order to get across what you're trying to communicate. You're going to have the landing page, that's going to really capture people's attention about your organization with photos and testimonials and quotes and the mission of your organization. So the landing page is really important. That's the page that when you click on your website link, it's going to take you to that first page, the introduction to what your organization is all about. There's going to be a page about who we are. People always want to know who is operating this organization. That's the next question people will look at. That's the question people will ask is, who is operating this? They want to see the experience, the expertise, the people who are on the board that may be prominent people in your community, because that gives people the confidence that your website is, first of all, legitimate and being run well. And if they donate to it, their money will be spent effectively on what are the promises made about what your organization does. So that who we are is a really important page. The next thing people look at actually are the programs. And here's where you're going to really spell out exactly what you do, where you do it, and who you do it for. And again, you don't have to have like a huge amount of information on every single page, but you have to have the crucial information well spelled out. And finally, the last page that you need is just a page where people can make a donation, can sign up to be a volunteer, can sign up to be on your mailing list, or to contact you. And this is really an important page as well. And you want to make it as easy as possible for people who visit your website to do all of this. You want to make it simple for them to donate or to sign up to be a volunteer, to contact you by either email or calling you, or sign up for your mailing list. So the key thing on that page is making it easy for people to do those kind of things. What do I do about doing a website? This is the question. Website development is a pretty expensive thing. If you go out and you contact a website creator webpage, right? You go to the link of a website creator and you decide to ask for a quote. A lot of times people have sticker shock. They'll be like 14 or for $10,000, $5,000. It can be really, it can be really quite expensive, which is one of the reasons that I'm talking about initially. All you want is 4 pages, because the fewer amount of pages, of course, the cheaper the quote will be. But so what they find out, what happens is when they are searching for a quote about how much it will take for me to, for them to make a website, they have sticker shock and they decide that I'm going to do it myself. So doing it yourself is a tough one. I have to tell you, it's a really tough one. Any of the website creator websites, that's a funny thing, I'm having trouble saying that, but any of the websites that you go to that allow you to create your own website actually are more complicated than they look and can be really, really time consuming. And I've done a couple of them myself, and no matter which, I've chosen actually a couple of those website creating services, and it is really challenges me. I was a CPA and I run a nonprofit, so I don't understand anything about design or fonts or color themes or any of those things that really make a website excellent. And so as a result, it took me a long time to create a website. So, but there is that choice. And what happens is, here's a really good, if you want to take the time and enjoy creating a website, here's a link to a place called TechSoup. Let me do that. They actually, this TechSoup actually offers courses, and here's one of those that is a nonprofit website strategy 301. So here is, you can join the course, and it talks about, and this one is $350 for 9 to 12 hours. So right there, that tells you quite a bit about how long, if it takes me 9 to 12 hours to learn about creating a website, how much longer is it going to take me to create my own website? So when you Google create your own website seminars, you'll find all kinds of things like that. I really like TechSoup, even though it's expensive. I think that if you're really set on creating your own website, this is the way to go. Okay, the other thing that you can do is hire a website designer. So this is different than actually hiring, going to a website creator business online, where you're going to actually hire the operator or the owner of the the website designer. You're actually going to be hiring their services as a website designer. What I'm talking about here is hiring an individual who is not behind a company do your website design. I don't know if you have ever used a couple of these sites that I'm going to click on here in a second, but there are places you can hire. You can pay them on an hourly basis or on a per project basis. The one thing that I want to talk about, actually, with both a website designer that like a site that you would use that whose business is actually creating a website, or if you hire an individual to create your website, you want to make sure that they use a user-friendly website building site that enables you to make changes and updates. So they'll go in and do the initial website, but there may be places where you want to be able to go in and post an event announcement, or you want to go in and change out pictures, or you want to go in and revise the wording on the description of one of your programs. There's times that you want to access your website and be able to make changes to your website. So when they create it for you, make sure that they're using a program that is user-friendly, that is easy for you as the owner of the website to go in and make those changes. You don't want it to be too complicated. You don't want to know about any kind of coding in order to make that website. You really just want it to be in layman terms so that it's easy for you. You don't want to learn a new skill. Your time is best used operating your program and not learning a new skill as far as how to operate your website. So here's a couple of places I wanted to share with you. So this is called Fiverr. I don't know if you've heard of Fiverr, but this is a place where you can actually find, so how do I show this? I guess I'm going to continue. Hang on a second. I guess I got to sign in. Okay. All right. So here's Fiverr.
We can't see the website, Annette.
We can't see that?
No.
Oh, share. I got to new share. Okay. Thank you, Christina. Okay. So can you see that now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I always forget to do a new share, and I really, really appreciate your reminding me. I get carried away. Okay, so here's Fiverr, and you can do contract work for these people. And here's what you find on here is basically people who are will do Facebook ads for you, will do illustrations for you, and a big one is graphics and design, or writing. If you want somebody to write the content for your website, you can use Fiverr. So let's do graphic and design. Basically, here's website design right here. Now I get a list of all the people who are listed on Fiverr who will do website designs for me. Two things I want to talk about that I've discovered about using Fiverr is that, first of all, what's great is these are ranked, these are reviewed. Not only do you review the designer, but the designer reviews you as a client, so that helps other people choose them, or make a better choice about if they're going to use them. And as far as on the other end, the people who are offering their services, when they review you, they tell other providers, if you're a good client to work with, basically. So there's one of the other things that you need to keep in mind when you use Fiverr is that, because in this technical day and age, people who are on Fiverr are from all over the world. And so sometimes you might be working with somebody who is in India or in Chile or in Greenland, so because everything's done online. But there's a couple of things that I want to caution you about. First of all, if you choose to work with a person who's located in a different part of the world, there's always that time zone difference issue. Because if I'm working with somebody in Kenya on my website, there's an 11-hour difference in time zone. So it's hard to, have chats and Zoom meetings because you're on different time zones. The other thing is sometimes you might want to decide you can filter this so that you only get results from people who are in the US. Sometimes I've found that can be difficult for me to communicate exactly my vision to a person who comes from a different cultural background. We don't share the same experiences and references. So there are times when I feel like I am best served by choosing somebody from the US, but other times it doesn't matter. And there's some excellent people working in all of these different countries who have a lot of experience and who are really current with, what's up with design and how you can best position your website and those kind of things. But you kind of, when you're choosing somebody, you want to keep in mind that time zone difference, and then also to kind of get a feel for, how they're going to respond to what you want your website to emanate, what you want it to project. So that's Fiverr, basically. The other one that is like that is called Upworks. And I think everybody might have heard of Upworks because of the kind of the controversy and everything that's been in the media about Upworks, but it's the same kind of a website. So these are really good websites for you to access. Okay, so when people talk about nonprofits, they a lot of time initially think about, for fundraising, they think about grants, being able to get a grant for their organization. So you go online and you Google grants for funding education for girls in rural Kenya, and you'll get a listing of all the organizations that potentially provide grants for that particular cause in that particular location. The thing that I found interesting that I learned when I first started looking for grant funding is there's a couple of things. First of all, not all grant funding is immediately available to everyone. A lot of grant funding is actually by invitation only, which means that somebody within the foundation or the grant making organization knows of your organization, your nonprofit, and invites you to apply for a grant. And there's quite a bit of that around grant funding. You can go on the website and you can see, a list of the grants they've made and how much they've made. But sometimes it's tough to access those grants because the only way that you will have access to an application is if you are actually invited to apply. There is the second level of grant funding is what's called a letter of intent. And this is kind of a pre-application process, in the sense that on the grant maker's website, it'll say, please write a letter of intent around what you would use our funding for. So they're kind of using the letters of intent as a screening process. And then they will issue an invitation to the people that they determine who might best be the best match for their grant. So writing a good letter of intent, if there is an indication on the grant maker's website, please submit a letter of intent. You'll want to spend a lot of time writing that letter of intent to be able to show that you're going to be a good match for their grants.
Annette, can you switch to the PowerPoint, please? I'm so sorry.
Oh, shoot. Well, why is my resume share? Can you see it now? Christy?
No. Can you please screen share? Everything just went away.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm sorry, you guys, for my lack of technicalness. I'm good at accounting and I'm good at nonprofits, but my technical skills sometimes are lacking. Okay, so the other thing so I talked about invitation only, and I talked about letters of intent, right? So now we're going to just talk about open grant applications, which there are it will be said very clearly on grant makers' websites exactly how to access this grant. It'll have a list of grants. It'll have the application, online application site for you. It'll show how much the grants will be made for. It will show when the application deadline is. It will also show exactly what the organization will give grants for. They're called initiatives. And so the biggest thing about applying for a grant, the most major part of applying for a grant is to match yourself with the grant maker's initiatives, basically. So if a grant maker said that we issue grants to organizations that are providing early childhood education in the state of Missouri, that is all they fund. That is their initiative. So if that is your nonprofit's goal, then you would match that grant maker, and that would be a great place for you to apply for a grant. So applying for a grant is not really kind of a willy-nilly kind of a process. It takes a lot of research in order to figure out how I'm going to be able to apply for that grant, and then to be able to look at that grant maker's initiatives and specifically see what kind of things that they fund. And if your initiatives are a good match for that. And grant makers are really strict about what they will fund. They spell it out really clearly. And so if you don't match it, it's kind of a waste of time and energy to go ahead and do a grant application. I want to back up for just a second, because if you're going to look for grant funding and do a grant application, I'm going to take you all the way back to your business plan, because that's basically what they're going to ask you about when you do a grant application. They're going to ask you all of that information that you've already put into your business plan. So that's another thumbs up for writing a business plan. Okay, there's different types of grants available, basically, and the grant maker will also specify that on their website. So there are building or capital grants, basically. So that's just for equipment and building and tangible things that you're going to use to operate your nonprofit. There are specifically technology, IT, and software grants. So if your organization is wanting to implement a new technology in the process of operating your nonprofit, if you're going to deliver your services using a new technology, then that is something that a grant would fund. There's one called capacity building, which means that I have started out with a small nonprofit. Over the last couple of years, I've operated it, but I'm now ready to expand my services in number of people I operate with, or the number of locations that I operate in. So what I'm looking for is I have a successful program already in place, but now I want to be able to grow that, to make it bigger, to reach more people in more locations, to offer additional services. So those are strictly capacity building grants. And the second one, the last one, is operational grants, so these first three are really specific, right? So you've got buildings or equipment that they would fund. Here's the one that's just strictly technology and software. Then the third one is just for building your organization. But the fourth one, operational grants, is kind of like a catch-all. And they say we'll give you $10,000 to operate your grant, and there's usually not a lot of really strict guidelines of where you're going to, how you're going to spend that. They do want you to prove that the money that you're using may be like going to hiring an additional person to do your fundraising, or something like that. They're going to ask you where that money is most likely going to be spent, but it is not limited to the categories of like those ones, those first three that we just talked about. Okay. So now here's, when you're doing your research, let's look at a few of the resources that you're going to be able to use. The first one is it's called GuideStar. Let me put it up here. Okay, this is GuideStar. Actually, I also mentioned it earlier in the presentation. And what it does is it gives you, you can look for nonprofits and foundations. What you're going to look for here are foundations who are grant makers. So this is one of the resources that's a good place for you to start looking for potential grant funders. Can you see my screen, Christina?
We're in the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here's another one. It's called Grant Station. And this is really an excellent resource, you guys. Actually, this is probably the premier resource on the internet. The thing is you have to be a member. You have to join. But in my opinion, this is really a good membership to pay for because they have so many resources. And not just about grant makers, but they tell you about how to write a grant, which is art and science in and of itself. So there are just a ton of resources on Grant Station. This is something that I really encourage you to check out in order, if you're searching for grant funding. And then there's one more. This one is, get this one up here.
Annette, we don't see the website you're sharing. Someone's suggesting to share the entire screen, maybe that first window when you hit share screen.
Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I really apologize. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I have to do a new share every time I do that. So here is another one, and this one is specific to New Orleans. I keep going back to New Orleans, but here is where you could find specific grants for the area. So, once again, grants, if you Google grants for education for girls in rural Africa, it will bring you to a specific website rather than to a general website like the one that I just showed you, which was Grant Station, which I'm going to pull up really quickly. I don't know if you saw that before. Grant Station. Okay, so here's this one. Are you able to see this one?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So I don't know if you saw this one before. This is the one that I was singing the praises about. Here's Grant Station. It's just got an enormous amount of resources. So I think like this is kind of the Bible. This is kind of the Bible as far as it goes. So, okay. 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 Here we go. Okay. So let's talk about fundraising, which is kind of the crux of the hardest part, right? You've got the idea, you've got the dream, you've got how it's going to operate. Now finding the sources right. Besides grants, what other kinds of fundraising can you do? So I took this list from an organization on the internet called donorbox.org that talks a lot about fundraising. And here's a lot of different ideas about how you can do fundraising, from events which are popular like fun runs or silent auctions, to doing online donation sites like Global Giving, which is where you can put your website on Global Giving. And actually, I'll include a link to Global Giving in the follow-up email here. But there are sites in which people will go and you can put crowdfunding, right? Like Global Giving. Phone solicitations, of course, are a little trickier. Email marketing is a thing all in and of itself. If I were to do an email marketing campaign, I would really seriously consider hiring somebody on Fiverr or Upworks, because that's kind of an art in of itself, and I don't really have those skills to do that. There are text to give now that's really, you can say text, you've seen it like on TV or on an advertisement or on a poster, text 4521 to give. And then that it makes it quick and easy. So people have their phone, right? And they're able to respond and immediately to, because they're inspired right at that single moment. So that's a really excellent venue for fundraising. The crowdfunding, like I talked about, Global Giving or Kickstarter is another one where you can do crowdfunding for your organization. The thing about crowdfunding is the hardest part is that generally crowdfunding relies on people sharing the information with their friends and family and acquaintances and people at work about your organization and sending them to your crowdfunding site. So people generally don't go on Global Giving or Kickstarter kind of just randomly looking for somebody to donate to. It's actually just a website, kind of a place where people can kind of make referrals to, so they can find out more about your organization and donate to. We just talked about grants, but there's also sponsorships and partnerships. So quite often, like if you're funding girls' wellness and empowerment in a certain spot, a good partner might be some sort of a corporation like Procter & Gamble, or a cosmetic company, or a sports company like Nike. So quite often you're able to engage in a commercial partnership who can help fund your operation. And then there's peer-to-peer fundraising, which is, typically something that you do on Facebook, right? A lot of times on Facebook, they have, okay, for my birthday, I'm going to raise money for Norfolk's Humane Society. So that's another way to do it, is through Facebook, peer-to-peer fundraising. Fundraising is tough. I would really recommend going to this donorbox.org website in order to kind of read more and start to get some ideas about kinds of fundraising that best fit your organization. A lot of thought goes into fundraising. And the thing about nonprofit organizations is you're competing with a lot of other people for your donors' dollars. You're competing with other nonprofits for your donors' dollars. So one of the things I found is that, for example, with the earthquake in Turkey right now, if you're going to fundraise, it's tough because people's kind of focus right now is on fundraising for survivors of the earthquakes in Turkey, right? So how am I going to compete with that? So you're going to have to really think about why somebody would choose to give you their donor dollars over somebody else. And it's not necessarily somebody strictly providing the same kind of services that you do, but it's just that, people's focus might be on something other than what you currently have a passion for providing to your beneficiaries. So fundraising is like, I could give a whole course in fundraising, and that's kind of just the nuts and bolts of fundraising. But here's a really good place to start. Okay, so finally, I've thrown a lot of information at you, but I want to put on here a couple of these really great general resources for nonprofits, where they just have answer so many of your questions instead of having to, search the web for each individual item that you're interested in learning about. We looked at learningcanada.org already. We just looked at TechSoup, which is a wonderful website. Let me open that real quick. Okay, so here's TechSoup. They have a lot of services and a lot of resources in a community. So they can talk about, and they have tons of webinars, they have forums, they have libraries. This is really, really excellent. The one thing I want to mention about TechSoup that I have found really helpful is that they provide products either free of charge or really low cost. So if you are looking for, let's see, hang on a second, my computer's really slow. Come on, here we go. So if you are looking for anything related to tech, basically software or hardware, you can actually access this through TechSoup. So here's Adobe, I can get it for $5. I can upgrade Windows. I can get QuickBooks online, right? Or I can look at networking. I can look at refurbished computers that are really inexpensive. And these are the resources that are available to nonprofits. So what you have to do in order to qualify for this is that you have to be verified as a nonprofit. So before you can access this, you have to be able to provide them with the nonprofit exemption letter that you got from the IRS that will validate that you're a nonprofit. And then you'll have access to all of these really good resources. So that's a really good resource. All right. Okay, I love TechSoup. Okay, the last one is called the Nonprofit Learning Lab. And I want to share that with you real quick. Oh, that's not sharing. There it goes. Okay, so there's the Nonprofit Learning Lab. And once again, it's got a ton of upcoming trainings. It talks about leadership and fundraising, planning, volunteer management, tons and tons of resources. It's got a great nonprofit library, and it's got a lot of free resources. It's got free webinars and blogs, and it has all kinds of great guidebooks, and it has a jobs board as well. So this is really, really a good resource. Okay, screen share. I'm still not quite getting how to do the screen share. Here we go. Okay, so what I hope to have done in this webinar is to kind of show you a common sense, practical way of setting your nonprofit up and starting to operate your nonprofit. The important parts of your nonprofit as far as writing a business plan, figuring out your budget, and finding resources, and giving you some really, really good nonprofit resources that you can access and use as you launch your own nonprofit. So I'm going to take a few questions now. I can see that we have a few down here. So let me take a look here. Okay. So one of the questions is, can we get access to a recording of part 1? I don't know the answer to that at the moment, but I will double check on that. And I will answer that question in the follow-up email to this webinar. Okay, the second question here is, when you're budgeting and you're considering your operating expenses, how much you allocate to salaries? So this person is struggling between making an impact and making ends meet, and delaying the work to maintain a job and support myself and family. And this is a tough one because you're really, really trying to juggle things. And one of the things that I have learned since doing my own nonprofit is that one of the biggest influencers of people donating to nonprofits is how much of their donation is going to actually benefit the person receiving the services. So, and those are called admin expenses. So what I'm talking about is, if somebody looks at a budget or the financial report for a nonprofit and they see that 50% of the fundraising expense money is going to salaries, that's not going to be looked upon really favorably, because they don't feel like maybe the resources are being used in the best way as far as benefiting the participants in their nonprofits, the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries aren't getting the most out of the money. So when you don't have any salaries, basically, and everybody's a volunteer, that means all the money that you're collecting through fundraising is actually going to operate the program that's benefiting the people that you're working with. That is important. So I think that answers your question, right? There for a while ago, one of the really, really mega nonprofits was in the news because they had like, operate administrative expenses, not actual program expenses, but their operational expenses were something like 80% of all of their revenue. And so they became under a lot of scrutiny because of that. People really want to see the majority of your money going to the operational expenses. And I know that juggling of trying to fundraise and trying to work at the same time, and you just gotta kind of try to work it out reasonably. You have to decide what is the bare minimum that you need to have in order to actually operate the bit. But once again, that's a hard question. You know what? I really can't answer that. I'd have to really look at the whole picture. I don't think I can just say right off the top of my head what a reasonable amount of salary is starting out. Again, if you would have to say, if I get $1,000 donation, can I use 10% of that for my salary? Is that realistic? And, kind of looking at the other way that you could figure that out would be doing some research on organizations that are similar to yours, and to see what percentage of their expenses and revenue are going to salaries. And I guess that's probably the best answer. Looking for a nonprofit similar to yours, similar in size, similar in operations, and determining what their percentages are. And that would give you a really good starting point. Okay, so here's some other chats. Okay, so it says, ours is general but direct. We exist to encourage and educate, empower Christians in healthcare, both nationally and international, to further the gospel. Okay, so I think that's Randy sharing his mission statement with us. He kind of gave us an example. And one of the things he wants to add, Randy wants to add to what I talked about with the mission statement, is that you begin with the end in mind and cover the bases of what your organization will be doing. If you operate, okay, and this is another good one. If you operate outside of the IRS, could it hold you accountable? Is this correct? And actually, that's not so much as a IRS question as a donor question, basically. Once again, really the donors are the people that you are accountable to financially, right? So if you are advertising that you're doing what your mission statement says you do, but you're operating outside of that mission, then you're going to have a trouble with the donors having confidence in where their money is going. So it's not so much an IRS problem, even though if you were a mega nonprofit and decided that, you know, rather than donating furniture to people who are making their houses into homes, you decide to do pet rescue, then that could be a problem as well. But I think that you'd really have to be really way out there in order for the IRS to get involved. Okay. Okay, here's another one about, okay, so in the chat, if you want to look in the chat, our Capital Corridor administrator has put a link to the recording on if you would like to watch part 1. And once again, like I said, we're going to send a follow-up email here, and we'll also include the link to the recording in that as well. And another suggestion is that if you want a nonprofit mentor, you can also request a SCORE mentor, because we do have people who are mentoring who can mentor specifically for nonprofits. Okay. Can you have multiple mentors? We actually can do you can have the primary mentor who can actually also work with an additional mentor to mentor you. So yes, there can be multiple mentors. Usually there's only just one other person who's doing co-mentoring with you, but that is possible. Thank you so much for the comments on sharing my screen. I appreciate that. I haven't quite honed that yet on how to do that. I really wanted to show everybody the resources, so I need to practice on that. Thank you for bearing with me on that. Okay, I think for Crystal, she just asked the question about the average of admin percent of funds raised to those that go to admin. And again, I think the best things that you can do is search out a nonprofit that's similar to yours and kind of look at what their percentages are. And again, donors really respond most highly to organizations where most of the funds go to benefiting the people that you're serving. So that's a perception thing. Okay. There's one more question here. Oh, that's the question. Okay, so that's it at this point. I hope that you had some of your questions answered, found some of this information that will be helpful to you. My intention was to provide you with some good resources, kind of simplify that process and point you in the right direction for good resources as you develop your nonprofit. And thank you very much for attending today.
Annette, can you stay on, please?